Okay, so it looks like we have some of our hosts that were having some technical difficulties getting in, but that's okay. That's the beauty of having so many of us online. Welcome to Trekker's Delight. We are so delighted to have you all with us. This is our second episode. What we decided to do was to have a family episode in honor of Thanksgiving. So for us, it is not Thanksgiving. We are just recording a little earlier. Um, and if luck would have it, the first person that we had always planned to go first is here with us. Man Hale, can you give us oh well first let me set this up for everyone. So what is happening is each of us we are going to basically talk about one of our favorite family centered episodes dealing with Star Trek. And so we're going to give each other about 5 7 minutes to kind of talk about the episode, and then we're going to kind of piggyback off of each other, and we're going to start with Manhill.
Thank you so much, Jermaine. Thank you so much for the introduction. I hope everyone can get in. We'll continue to try to help you in the chat. I would recommend just trying not to continue without adding the channel or the stream from what I see in the dashboard. But to get right to it, happy Thanksgiving. It's American Thanksgiving. Canada, we have a different Thanksgiving. It's a month before. I know we're strange to you guys, but we eat turkey and we watch football, and it helps interrupt our October. So it's nice. I chose an episode. Hey, we got some people. Hello,
Hey, how's it
how's
going?
everyone doing?
Everybody hear
Good,
me
good.
okay?
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome sauce.
welcome. Awesome sauce.
Let's
Yes.
go.
Welcome to the Thanksgiving episode. Jermaine just gave a nice introduction, and I was about to describe the episode that I chose. I saw a bunch of people had chosen one, and um, so I chose The Visitor from DS9. It's one of my, I think it's like like one of those acclaimed episodes. There's some that stick out in the memory, but the Visitor episode was special for so many reasons. But one of the most important reasons hey, it's just my giant head, uh, that I loved that episode was you got to see an adult Jake Sisko and his retrospective, played by Tony Todd. Fantastic performance. And this writer, and he's in the middle of like the New Orleans bayou. It's a late night, and this writer named Melanie comes out of nowhere on this like stormy night, and wonders if he's the Jake Sisko that wrote Anselm. And he's like, "Yeah." He's, "Why don't you come in, have some tea, relax?" And she wants to hear all about his life. She confesses that she was there. She wants to be a writer. He tells her, "Any other night I wouldn't have talked to you, but you picked tonight." So you sit down, you have this epic conversation where he retells the story of being Jake Sisko and how he ended up in this place, which is wild, actually. Um, the writing device. And the thing that sticks out to you during this episode as Jake loses his father is the father-son relationship between Jake, but then also, the quote in the thing is like, the worst thing that could happen to a boy happened to him. He lost his father, and he loses him, presumed dead. Everyone on the station is comforting Jake, right? He's crying into Dax's chest. Kira's like patting him on the head, and everyone's trying to be there for him. But after about, a month, I think, everything kind of goes back to normal. But he doesn't lose faith. And there's another quote where, some people, they get over losing their dad, and someone asks him, "Did you?" He's like, "No, I suppose not." Um, for Thanksgiving and for family, I chose this episode because it was so enduring how important his father was to him, um, which is like the central theme of like DS9, this father-son relationship. But all of the people around Jake as well, loved him and loved his father, and wanted to be there for him. Um, and he never gave up on him. To the end of his life, he changed fields when he started to figure out that he could bring him back. And he tried his best to honor the love or reflect the love back to his father. His father, all along the way, kept telling him to poke his head up and look around once in a while. Uh, it's life, Jake, and if you aren't careful, you might miss it. So that's why I chose that. That episode makes me super thankful to have the people that I have in my life to remind me um, to be appreciative, to have humility, uh, to give me hope, even in dark times. Uh, that you can have great art that comes from pain, that you can have um, enduring familial bonds that can be unbroken, and that the people around you aren't just your friends; they're your family. And if you open up your heart to them, they can be there for you. That's it. Sorry, I'm done.
And I was still on mute. All right. So some of our newcomers, Brian, Richard, would you like to jump in?
Well, I also like that episode. It's a pretty powerful episode. Tony Todd, awesome as usual. Um, yeah, I think it's a very interesting look at like the mental health of a kid that like won't let go to his father, even when he knows he should. And I think I think it's a life lesson. It's like that we need to learn to let go of things when it's pretty obvious that there's no coming back from it. And anybody else?
Am I still on mute?
No, sir. Go for it.
Wonderful. I think the same thing. I like that it's an alternate take on what could have happened because ultimately we know in the end of the episode they fix the problem, which makes Jake Sisko not have to be raised in that way without a father. And so it's a different future. And I like how it shows how devoted he was to his dad, but his dad, the whole story, every time he appears to his son Jake, he's like, you gotta move on, like live your life, don't worry about me, I'm just happy I get to see you every few years, decades, or whatever the time frame may be. So yeah, it does show the devotion between father and son, and they are kind of a staple of the whole series. It starts with Jake and Ben Sisko's relationship without a mother, so it's very family centric.
Well, thank you, sir. Really do appreciate that. That gives us some time to kind of open up this next episode. This time we have Brandon. Brandon is going to lead us. It's another Deep Space Nine episode. I'm telling you, DS9 is strong here with us. Brandon, take it away, sir. Brandon?
You got me muted.
No, sir.
I'm muted.
We can hear you. Oh,
You guys can hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it just shows that you're muted. You're not.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Anyway, yeah, mine actually is not a DS9. It's a Voyager episode. It's called Homestead, and it is one of the final episodes of Star Trek Voyager, where Neelix, basically, it's the one where he leaves the show. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't watched it yet. Sorry, cat's out of the bag. For me, it starts off with First Contact Day. So you're celebrating one of the most significant events in the history of Starfleet, Vulcan's landing, introducing the Zephyr Cochrane. And Neelix is trying to get Tuvok to dance in some fashion, some way. You know, he's celebrating a very important significance in Starfleet, which we know is all about incorporating everybody that we can into a unified group mind, bringing everybody. The way I look at it is Starfleet is a way of bringing everybody into being a big giant family. That's how I see it. You know, sharing culture, sharing events and timelines and significant traditions and whatnot. And so Neelix is just trying to pass this on. It's never been done before, but he wants to celebrate it. So he's doing that kind of thing. They encounter an asteroid field where there's a whole bunch of Talaxians, 500 inhabitants that are inside an asteroid. We're talking Neelix here, who is 7 years away from his homeland of Talax. He hasn't seen another Talaxian in 6 years. So he gets a little ambitious, and they go in the Delta Flyer and they encounter these they go scan the asteroid and try to introduce themselves because they're not responding to their hails. And there's a bunch of miners in the asteroid, mining the asteroid field. And the ship gets hit, it goes down. It turns into this is now a puzzle, because what's going on? How did these Talaxians get here? What are the miners doing? Was it on purpose? Was it not on purpose? The interesting thing that happens after this is he meets a female Talaxian named Dexa and her son Brax, and the leader of the colony, the Council Regent Oxlon. They're a non-violent group of Talaxians. They have learned through past experience that it's not a good thing to push your way through what you need, but that can come with some consequences. And so they thought they found a home in this asteroid, but the miners are trying to push them out. It turns into do we do this diplomatically? Do we set this up as our home? You know, we've already been here for 5 years. What do we do? Do we dismantle everything? We only have one ship left. So they go into negotiations. Those negotiations fail. And during this whole process, Neelix is getting to know these Talaxians, getting to know Dexa and Brax, and invites in Voyager, and they tour the ship. Well, Brax overhears that the negotiations fail. He's a very young boy. He turns that against Neelix. And, it turns into Brax is upset at Neelix because, hey, you said we could stay, and now we have to leave. So the negotiations fail. Then they have to take things into their own hands and figure out what they're doing next. So they use shield generators or force field emitters and create a shield around the asteroid. And they end up getting completely protected with the help of Neelix. One of the most significant parts of this, I think, for Neelix is the way Tuvok responds to Neelix himself. Neelix asks for help, and Tuvok comes in with all the skills you've acquired have provided you with the skills you need if you were to take on a leadership role in this circumstance. So it's up to you. And you have what it takes to bring these people where they need to be. So that's reinforcement from one of the most amazing paired communication friendships in the Star Trek Voyager universe. You know, they were two opposites that have turned into a pair that you can't imagine one without the other, the banter, the amazing stuff. So Neelix does this. They put a shield up around the place. The miners can't get through. They end up getting frustrated and going away. And Neelix makes this place home with these new Talaxians. He ends up taking on a leadership role. He becomes and starts courting Dexa. And in future episodes, we find out that he's going to ask Dexa to marry him and all that kind of stuff. But he literally builds himself a life out of nothing, just like the rest of these Talaxians did. And it's not just because they're his people, but it's because they needed him, and because of his family of the Voyager crew, he had the skill set that he was able to provide for this new group of people. And I look at it as, for me, the people you surround yourself with, you're not only gleaning information and skills from them, but they're gleaning stuff from you as well. So don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and do something you've never done before, especially if it helps those you care about. That's my take on that episode. And I think that can create a source of family.
No doubt, no doubt. And speaking of family, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it straight into the original, the one and only, the original Star Trek, the original show with Kirk, Spock, and everyone we've come to know and love. All right, so the episode that I've chosen is Journey to Babel. So Journey to Babel is basically an episode where the Enterprise has been asked to kind of serve as a place for mediation. A particular species is trying to gain entrance into the Federation, and you have some interested parties. Among them is Ambassador Sarek. All right, so yes. So he and his wife Amanda board the Enterprise, and so Kirk, thinking, hey, this is a Vulcan, right? So Spock, why don't you escort the ambassador to his room? Sarek immediately says, nah, I don't want that. Ain't happening. And so, Kirk immediately just pivots and he says, okay, well then, Spock, since we're here on Vulcan, you might as well spend some time with your parents. And then, of course, the camera pans to Spock, and Spock, he's thinking, what should I say? And so basically he just says, Ambassador Sarek and Amanda are my parents. Boom. It's kind of like, the mic just drops right then and there. And so then later in the episode, Sarek, he kind of hinted at it at the very beginning of the episode, but he has some type of heart defect. So Bones, he's trying to treat him, and then basically he's just like, we need a blood diffusion. He only takes a certain type of blood type, is a rare blood type. The only person on the ship that has that blood type is Spock. So Spock immediately, he's like, hey, I'll do this. Bones says, nope, you're half human too. So half of your blood is human. So we would basically kill you if we did this to you, right? So he's like, I can do it, no big deal. But it's Amanda who says, nah, that ain't happening. I could lose my son and my husband. It's not happening. And then all of a sudden, cut to another scene. Kirk is hurt. Someone has attacked him on the ship. So now Spock is in charge of the Enterprise. Because he's now in charge of the Enterprise, there are regulations that basically say that Spock can't do this. He can't do it. He has to run the ship. His father's life is secondary. And in the biggest about face that I've ever seen on a show like this, Amanda's is like, you better do this. You better save your father. But he's like, no, it can't happen. So now he's on the bridge, meaning Spock. Bones is back in sick bay. Kirk wakes up. Kirk devises this plan where basically he's going to go up to the bridge and fool Spock into thinking that everything is okay. He does that. Spock leaves. He goes to sickbay to help his father. This alien ship attacks, so Kirk stays on the bridge. So now Spock is in there with his father. He's helping his father, all the other good stuff. When the attack is over with, Spock goes back down to basically see what's going on. He's worried. He's concerned about his first officer. They have this relationship, right? This is season 2 of Star Trek. So he gets down there. Spock is up and alert, and he's just like, hey, look, I figured it out. I figured out what was going on with the alien ship. And he's like, but I don't understand why I couldn't figure it out before. Kirk is just like, I think you had other things on your mind. And at that point, Amanda then turns to Sarek and she's like, you should thank your son. He's like, thank him for what? What are you talking about? And so then she says, he is the reason why you're alive. So Sarek kind of looks at him, kind of like in shock. Like, like you can't see it on his face, but you can see it on his face. It's like one of those things that the Vulcans do. And so then all of a sudden, he was just like, I don't have to thank him for that. That was a logical thing for him to do. It was like, what? What are you talking about? So then immediately Spock is just like, oh no. Amanda erupts. She's like, what are you talking about? This logic thing. I'm tired of logic. The entire show, what she was doing was she was like protecting Sarek. She was like kind of smoothing his edges with everybody else. She was also explaining Spock away. Like, this is the reason why Spock is, the way that Spock is. And then in that moment, she just erupts. And then Spock is just like, she's quite emotional, isn't she? And Sarek, and then he asks his dad, why did you marry her? Well, son, basically, it was the logical thing for me to do at the time. It was a beautiful moment. Like, it made everything just, number one, it helped us to understand who Spock was. It helped us to humanize him. Like, really, there was like a segment where Bones was just like, did he ever like, just act like a kid? And she was just like, well, he had a big teddy bear. And Spock was just like, nah, it wasn't really a teddy bear. It was actually very much so alive. And so that episode for me kind of helped me to understand who and what Star Trek was, especially the relationship between Spock and Kirk. As a little kid, I saw the movies, but I didn't understand why their relationship was what they were. But that episode helped me to understand who and what they were. So having said all of that, I think Manny. After hearing that, can you give us like your insight into that show, different things that kind of stood out for you? And then after that, we'll go to Marie. We have about a minute left. You're on. But for whatever reason, I can't hear you.
Hello?
But yeah.
Oh, hey, sorry. What I was saying, sorry, was that in the Vulcan relationship, in Vulcan relationships, there's a lot of posturing and pretending and this idea that they can't acknowledge their emotions, that it's so taboo. And this set the pro forma of like all Vulcan relationships for the rest of Star Trek. Like, and having a father-son Vulcan relationship and a mother-son and husband and wife relationship, it kind of is an exemplar. You could see echoes of this in Enterprise. You can see echoes of this in TNG. And yeah, I agree. What I would close with is to say that, hey, William, how are you, man?
Hi.
Welcome. I would say that I get it. I get why they do it. I mean, especially after Tuvok. I think, Brandon made this point about Tuvok that it still resonates with me, which is that he's the definitive Vulcan that we really explored in TNG, and that you understand Vulcans a lot more because of him and his bonds to him. And that's what I would liken it to. Later, when I saw Sarek in like TNG, and he was still like that, and then when like Jean-Luc Picard was like crying after having a mind meld with him, like you saw the depth of which you plumbed those depths. So I would say that past all this posturing, they still have like these incredibly deep bonds that just won't acknowledge. Marie?
I gotta say the most interesting part of it to me is what it says about this relationship between Spock and Sarek. I joke a lot about Sarek's A+ parenting, and I think he's the second worst dad actually in Star Trek, Worf being the first. Because there's this divide, right, between Sarek and Spock, to the extent that Kirk, who is now one of Spock's closest friends, has no idea that his buddy's parents are about to come on board. And that's huge. This means he hasn't even been mentioned, right? There's not a casual name drop of, hey, my dad's one of the preeminent ambassadors in the Federation, but he's also kind of a tool. Like, there's none of that, which indicates just the depth of how difficult that relationship is, which is, I think, the most interesting aspect of the position in which Spock finds himself, right? And it's also why I think Sarek's "it's the logical thing to do" response is such a cop-out on Sarek's part, because Sarek is aware, and we know Sarek is aware because we've all seen season, what was it, 1 of Discovery, where they explore that he has, not been the greatest of fathers. He wasn't a great father to Sybok, which is how we get Star Trek V. I mean, we'll ignore the whole contract thing between Nimoy and Shatner. But we know he was a bad dad to Michael Burnham, and we know he wasn't a great dad to Spock. And Star Trek, I think, really struggles with family as a concept. It's great with found family, but it's not really great about negotiating with the family you have. And I think Babel is actually a really great example of that. So I guess I would walk away from where Jermaine went with it. So I guess what I would say there.
That's a great description, Jermaine.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you both. So Marie, can you transition us into your episode of Family?
That's perfect, actually, because I'm talking about how things don't work. And family is about relationships that sort of work, but don't really. So basically, the whole point is that, immediately after the events of Best of Both Worlds Part 2, they kick Picard off to go take some time off because he's got to process all of the trauma inherent in having been Locutus. And so he goes back to Earth. He's like, I've got nowhere to go. And Troy's like, but you've got a brother. Maybe you should go see him. Grow some grapes. I don't know. And he's like, but she's like, go. And so he does. And interestingly enough, Family is also one of those episodes that doesn't have 1 story or 2 stories. It actually has 3. So the B story is Worf's parents coming on board and basically saying that they need to be there to support their son, but also drawing a very good boundary with Worf in saying, hey, we can't take care of Alexander for the rest of his life. You're going to have to step up. And then the 3rd story involves Wesley Crusher. His mother finds in basically the Starfleet equivalent of a trunk of old random stuff, a message from Jack to his son. And so the 3rd story deals with Wesley kind of processing what that is. But going back to Picard for a second, Picard literally walks from the village to the estate because he doesn't want to beam there, guys. He needs time. He needs time to gird his proverbial loins and get into his old home because he knows he's going to open up a whole host of problems. And I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but I sure have. Especially when facing going back to visit family and going back to doing, to my old childhood home. And that's kind of where Picard is, right? He's had this storied career. He's had this incredibly traumatic thing happen to him. And now he's about to go into a different kind of trauma because now he's got to negotiate this just incredibly difficult relationship with his brother Robert. Worf is also dealing with this difficult relationship because Worf's parents come on board and there's this whole feeling basically that Sergei Rozhenko knows the Enterprise better than anybody else and is going to tell everybody else also his son Worf is the best thing that's ever happened, right? He's going to be that embarrassing dad. And so we're seeing Worf kind of navigating that and then eventually figuring out that it's because his parents love him, and being able to accept that affection is really fantastic. For Wesley, it's a much more difficult conversation because we know that there's been this huge gap in Wesley's life, this absence of Jack. He's replaced him partially with Picard, but this is the first time that Wesley really gets the opportunity to hear his father speak. And I found this particularly interesting because when I first saw it as a kid, obviously I didn't have children, but now I do. And having listened to this whole narrative, it strikes a huge chord because Jack is a brand new parent. He's worried about raising new people. He wants the best for his son, and he's really hoping that he's going to be there. But the ultimate takeaway is that he wants Wesley to be happy, and it's this great benediction that they'll pick up on later in Journey's End. But I guess what I most love about family is that it's difficult, right? The episode just reflects on how hard family can be. Picard and Robert actually get into a fist fight. Worf almost has to walk away from his parents, and then they're like, BT Dubs, you're about to have to step up and be a dad. And Wesley, it just revisits this entire snarl of trauma for him. But even though everything is difficult, even though these relationships are hard, they actually manage to come out on a better end, right? Even though Picard and Robert have been arguing about, being a Starfleet captain versus being a traditionalist, duty to the greater world of the Federation and Starfleet versus duty to your history and your family. They come from very, very different worlds, and they come from very different perspectives, both of which are valid. But they work it out. Yeah, it involves rolling around in the mud and beating the crap out of each other, but they work it out because ultimately they do love each other. Even if it's not a love that they can occupy the same space for more than maybe 10 minutes, but it's a real love. Just like Worf learns that, especially after the events of Birthright and his discommendation, or Sins of the Father, actually, not Birthright, it's Sins of the Fathers in season 3. Worf learns from his parents that he's worthy of love. And I think that's huge. And I think that's also one of, this great kind of discussion for Worf, because Worf lives in this amorphous area of being both Klingon, but also expected to being human. And his parents just accept him for who he is. And he didn't realize that was what was going on. And then Wesley gets to revisit and get some peace because he does get real demonstrable proof that his father loved him. And he will be able to take that with him on his journeys in the Traveler, with the Traveler forever, which I think is such a great kind of microcosm of what Star Trek tries to do with family. Doesn't always succeed, but in Family, I think it did. That's all I got, Jermaine.
Okay.
Everybody
Richard.
be proud. I made it under time.
Richard, I think we have about 30 seconds. Can you add something to that in 30 seconds?
Yeah, I'll just say that I do love seeing, this is the first time that Star Trek tackles like a sequel to another episode, because usually they're standalone issue of the week, but they fought in the writer's room allegedly that, you know what, he just, Picard got assimilated by the Borg. He needs some time to readjust. We're going to devote a whole episode to it. And then they were worried about reruns. Oh, well, in syndication, it's going to be hard. People aren't going to know that he was assimilated, and they're like, they'll get it. And because of that, I think that leads to a lot of stories that can be more serialized, longer stories in Star Trek. So I'm glad they did that. They didn't just say, he got assimilated 1 week, now next week he's fine. There's some emotional baggage attached.
All right. So that leads us straight into, oh, Lord. Richard, that leads us to you.
All right, I'm doing, like you said, there was people covering multiple Deep Space Nine episodes. I'm one of them. I'm covering the season 5, episode 6, I believe. Yeah, 5, 6 of Deep Space Nine, entitled Trials and Tribulations. I love this episode. I equate it as a family reunion episode because we have the crew of Deep Space Nine with the crew of the original series. So it's a really big family, combining 2 Star Trek families together. They actually did it because it was a tribute to the 30th anniversary at the time of Star Trek being on the air. At first, they were toying with the idea of doing a sequel to Charlie X, or maybe do a reboot of the Sigma Iosha 2 for a piece of the action, revisit that gangster planet. But they're like, No, remember Forrest Gump in 1994? How they seamlessly transitioned Forrest, Tom Hanks, into all these moments in history? We can take our Deep Space Nine crew and put them on the Enterprise. How cool would that be? It was cool. And so they were able to use the original series footage from The Trouble with Triples and a little bit from Mirror Mirror, and used they used the technology that they had at the time, which was a little bit better than previous green screen technology. And they had the actor who played Arn Darvin return, and his name is Charlie Brill, and he played that Klingon posing as human again for the Deep Space Nine crew. As you all know, they deal with the Bajoran orbs. There was an orb of time that sent the Defiant and whoever was on board the Defiant to the K7 station back in the 23rd century. And they're like, oh no, it's the Enterprise. Which Enterprise? There have been 5, 6. This was the first Enterprise, Kirk's Enterprise. Oh, him, James T. Kirk, the one and only. And it's a thrill for that crew to meet up with the old crew, and it pays great homage to the original series. And that aired back in November 4th, 1996. And you see Dax say things like, I am a part of this time. I lived in this time. It's hard not to want to go back. And she's like looking longingly in the eyes of Kirk and Spock in the foreground while her and Benjamin Sisko are in the background. And she's like, oh, isn't he dreamy? And they're like, well, Kirk was known as a ladies' man. And she's like, no, I'm talking about Spock. He's like, all right, let's go. And they have their hijinks. You have Dr. Bashir running into Lieutenant Livingston, and Lieutenant Livingston, who is probably a relation to him. So he's like, this could be some predestination paradox. I could be my own great, great, great grandfather. So that's fun. And I thought that everything in it, the Tribbles are obviously one of the comedic gold moments in the original series, and they're like, let's bring it back for Deep Space Nine. And I thought that was great to do. I should also do an honorable mention to the season 3 episode 2 of Voyager. The series Voyager is what I'm trying to say. Their 30th anniversary episode was called Flashback, where Tuvok and Janeway get to interact with the crew of the Excelsior, with Captain Sulu and First Officer Rand, or I forget if she was First Officer, but she was there. And that aired September 11th, 1996. So it was another family reunion episode with the original series cast members and the current crew of Deep Space Nine and Voyager. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I always quote this episode, this one and The Trouble with Tribbles, like, gorged on my grain. That's a quote. Also, Dax at the beginning of the episode says, I guess you boys from Temporal Investigations are always on time. So very tongue-in-cheeky. I love a good comedic Star Trek episode. But that's it. It was a thrill to watch, and I watched it when it aired first off. I recorded it on my VHS tape, and I spliced it together with the original series, Trouble with Triples, and yeah, it's a big one for me. Anytime they do these anniversary episodes and combine different generations of Star Trek together, I think it's a big family reunion. And yeah,
Be careful, Richard. You're aging yourself with words like VHS.
yeah.
Oh.
I recorded it on DVD, of course, is what I meant to say. But yeah, that's one of my favorite episodes, and I think it applies to family, like I said, just because it brings the Trek family closer together to interact in different times and different iterations of Star Trek, which is cool. I love a good continuity story.
Okay. So Brian, William, is there something that you'd like to add to that particular episode?
It is one of my favorites from DS9, I will say, and I do like that throwback to the original series with the Tribbles. But yeah, the thing with Bashir is just kind of wow, because he's like, well, it could be like a like a paradox or something like that. It's like if I don't sleep with this woman, I could never exist because. And I'm just like, wow, man. Seriously, that's where you're going with that,
It's such a Rick Berman moment.
right? It's like, yeah, it's like with all the things that you could have done with that, that's where you're going. Yeah. Anywho.
All right. Well, that leads us right back to you, Brian. So Brian is going to talk to us about yet another DS9 episode. This one is titled "Image in the Sand."
Yep. Personally, when I think of family, I think of family dinner, and nothing says family dinner like Benjamin Sisko. I mean, basically, it's like he's always cooking for everybody, but in this particular instance, he's actually gone back home to his father's family restaurant after the death of Jadzia and a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on, up to and including all of the orbs going dark. So basically, if you'll pardon the parlance, all hell is breaking loose in the universe, and he's like, you know what? I got to go home and clear my head. But while he's there, he learns about his mother, who was never there when he was growing up. And come to find out, she is a wormhole alien that decided to possess a woman's body, go to Earth, get it on with his dad, and then, basically ghost him when he's born. I mean, like, how do you process something like that, to be honest? It's like, your parents are not of this earth, and furthermore, they had to possess someone else in order for all of this stuff to happen. But the thing that really brings this home for me, if you'll pardon the pun, is when Sisko decides that he's going to go and search for this woman who was his mother. And so basically, he's all ready to go, and he's packed, and he's about to leave. And all of a sudden, Jake and his father show up, and they're like, "Yep, we're coming too." And he's like, "No, this is a me thing." He's like, "No, this is an us thing. This is a family thing." And then, lo and behold, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Ezri Dax shows up, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm coming too." So basically, it's like, hey, everybody jump into Space Winnebago or RV or whatever. We're going on a family trip. And it's interesting to me that, basically in that particular moment, his family decided to come together at this pivotal point, and they're like, okay, we're going to help you sort all this stuff out so you can get back to doing whatever you're going to do. And that's ultimately that's what family is supposed to be all about, And that's kind of where my mind went when we were thinking family. But I think that's pretty much all I've got. If anybody else wants to comment, I know that's pretty short.
You're just saying the rest of us are very loquacious. That's all. You just talk too much. That's all.
You say that like it's a bad thing, though.
No, not at all. I'm just not at all. It was a slight dig to me as well. So, is there anyone who would like to comment on that? We haven't heard from Manny in a second. We definitely haven't heard from William yet. Brandon, what about you?
The only thing I really have to say on that episode is it has a lot of gut punches in it. I mean, you find out that his mother is the biological entity of his mother is dead because she was killed in a hover car accident. You find out that the prophet that inhabited his mother is missing and inhabiting an orb somewhere. You find out that the mother he thought he had all these years was not his true mother. You find out that you lost one huge person in your life, one of his best friends, and now she's back. It's a huge gut punch. And like Marie was saying, commenting on your video on your episode, Jermaine, it's about the fluctuation going back and forth. It is really kind of the heart and soul of family. If you don't have ups and downs in your family's not real. It's that's just the reality of it.
I mean, to be fair, Cisco's family wasn't real either.
Yeah,
I mean,
true, but
right?
That's my comment
I mean,
on the subject.
So apparently Cisco wins for trauma. She's like, hey, by the way, you're Bajoran Jesus. Have fun with that.
I think that's also why he was my pseudo father, because they wrote his character in a way that he's kind of a better parent than we've seen, like the best parent in the Star Trek universe across galaxies. But anyway.
To the point that he was extremely unhappy with how they ended it for his character in What We Leave Behind, because he was he would never have abandoned Jake, and he didn't like being the image of an absentee black father, and he thought that was particularly problematic.
Exactly.
And I think it's actually interesting to note that they actually had that dynamic in real life as well. Like whenever they were on set, Sarah Lofton was essentially his son on the set. And I think that was actually kind of cool, him taking him under his wing, and Avery Brooks just like being the father figure. Because that was his supposed role on the show, and he was gonna do that on the set too. And I actually really liked hearing about that as well.
Yeah, we only have about 20 seconds just to add something real quick. So in what they left behind, Sarek also says or mentions the fact that Avery Brooks took him and his real son, biological son, to a basketball game, and he was introducing everyone as, this is Sarek, my other son. So, all right. So we only have about 5 seconds. Let us transition into William. William says that what he has to talk about will definitely piggyback off of what others have said. He's going to be talking about actually a movie titled Generations, Star Trek Generations. Did he say Picard? I'm not certain. At this point, it's all over the place. But I think it's Generations. So, William, take it away.
Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the reason why I wanted to partially speak on family in TNG is because it's like the perfect segue into a certain scene. Well, actually, a couple of scenes in Generations. And I loved Richard's point, by the way. Nice to meet you, by the way. That how one particular instance or experience can lead to multiple experiences for future Trek character development. Now, there are some that might believe that the scene where Picard becomes incredibly vulnerable in Star Trek Generations is pointless. Me, I think it's icing on the cake. I love every bit of it. There's a reason everything about Generations is, in my opinion, flawless. Okay, I don't care if it was made in '94. I don't care if they tried to squeeze so many things in. I don't care if the basic plot was to destroy the Enterprise for no reason. I don't care. I'm sorry. Cool. All good things, right? But anyway, that all being said, the scene where Picard becomes vulnerable and you see real tears fall down his eyes when he realized that his brother and his nephew died in a fire. And I'll admit it was sudden, but it's also realistic. Things from the perspective of other people suddenly happen. That's kind of, most of the time, that's how death works. It just hits you. And Troy knew that. In a way, to me, that scene didn't just come out of nowhere. She felt it. She's empathic. She knew something was wrong from the jump. Like from the first, I won't say from the first scene of the movie, for the first scene continuity wise of the film. And I could kind of tell that in a way they were trying to make Picard like Kirk in a sense. And can you guys see me? I feel like my camera is like moving super slow.
You're doing good.
Okay, thanks. Well, anyway, like when Kirk lost his son, I was like, okay. And now Picard is like almost under that same umbrella, except he doesn't really have a vendetta against Klingons, but he really broke down because his brother and his nephew are gone. They're deceased. And now he has to carry that with him for the rest of his life. And a fun fact about me, I love it when Star Trek gets vulnerable. They never shy away from vulnerable points in characters. I absolutely love that about Trek. It brings it home for me and for a lot of people because death does happen. It absolutely does. And there's no way around it. So, which also brings me to another point in Generations. One that I slightly disagreed with as far as his Nexus wife was, but you knew that in Picard's imaginary heaven in the Nexus, he does long to have a family. He wants a family. He really does. And that all said, now I didn't know why they got some woman to play his wife that was pretty much Beverly Crusher from Wish, in my opinion. But yeah, and I was like, Cup of Earl Grey, it would be perfect. I'm like, who are you? Like, no, why are you here? Okay, you could have been Beverly, you could have been Bosch, you could have been that one child from that one girl from Lessons. You could have been any. Who are you? Like, you got.
I don't see it ever having been Vosh, and I'm kind of glad that just got nipped in the bud.
Right, but it could have been one of those three, other than whoever this person is that we saw only one time. I mean, at least Riker's holodeck character made a reappearance in a later episode. Like, at least that much. Who is this girl? So that's the only thing that I disagree with. It's like, if you're going to bring something back, surprise me, bring something back. Don't just put in someone from Wish. I'm sorry, if you get the reference. So, but Picard does long for a family. He really does. And he does love Beverly. I was reading, even though it's not really canon, I was reading the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard. And it pretty much explains why he closes himself off. Because growing up over the years, he felt like to meet his family standards or people that he loves standards, he had to be the overachiever. He had to be the best at everything, which is how the animosity between him and his brother even happened. But yeah, I love that. That's what I loved about it, is the fact that in Generations they weren't, and they don't really show it again until, the Picard show, but I really love that they showed Picard's vulnerability. And I'm not saying, and he showed vulnerability towards Data's passing as well too, of course. But I meant like as far as his own family and how he feels, because Picard does feel, even though he won't admit it. Beverly knows, just like the one episode when they were telepathically linked. They know. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have for it.
All right, thank you so much, William. We only have about 10 seconds, but guys, let's do this. We have about a minute left. Is there someone willing to wrap us up before we say Happy Thanksgiving?
If it's not Jesus, don't pick it up.
I gotta tell you, I mean, that particular sequence with Picard just did not work for me because it just did not feel real. Because it's too much of a transition immediately going into what happens after that. It's like all of a sudden there's a distress alert and he's like, I'm fine. Like, he doesn't even dry his tears, y'all. He just gets up and goes. And for me, I sort of think that had more, they were trying to get at what you're talking about, this relationship with family, but Picard's been he's not good at it. And much like all the rest of Trek, these are a whole bunch of people that end up light years away from their families and have to create these new relationships. Saru makes the point that we talked about last week. One cannot have all the lives that one desires. I don't think it's until Su'Kal telling him otherwise that Trek has really managed to get its head around that as a concept, that you don't. I think Homestead comes pretty close because Neelix doesn't actually lose his family. He still gets to talk and play is it Damjat? I don't remember. With
Kadiskat.
That's Kadiskat. Damjat's the gambling game. Mea culpa. He gets to play with, the Wildman girl. But generally speaking, Trek does not handle it. And I think I'm really looking forward to the new content because I think we're really starting to sort of wrap our heads around that as a concept, right? But even then, we're still dealing with a lot of characters who've had families stripped away from them. Think about Prodigy, think about Picard, think about all of these other characters, right? But I'm really hopeful at the end of the day that Trek is going to figure out how to find a balance between having this life, this Starfleet life, and then also being able to have a family and to do it the right way, in a healthy way. So fingers crossed, y'all. Also,
yes.
Fingers crossed that all of y'all and whoever's celebrating also managed to come away with a sense of peace and healthy survival from Thanksgiving.
Yes, please have a mentally safe, a prosperous Thanksgiving break. With that, what we're going to do is we are going to end this. We hope that you have enjoyed our second episode of Trekker's Delight. Please stay delighted as we continue to trek on.
Peace and long life.
Live long and prosper.
Bye.
And to all the Klingons out there, Qapla'.